He promoted the guy she trained? Accident? Or was Daniel setting this up?
He smiled while saying it. You should be happy for him. And everyone turned to look at me. I was sitting in a glass conference room, hands locked together, while my manager Daniel stood at the front announcing Ryan, the guy I trained, as our new team lead. I didn't miss anything. I built his reports, fixed his mistakes, even covered his deadlines when he fell behind. Daniel knew that. The whole team did. But somehow, my name never came up. Not once. Ryan wouldn't even look at me. Just sat there, nodding, like he earned it. I forced a smile, said congrats, and started packing my laptop while the meeting was still going. That's when Daniel's tone shifted. Let's not make this dramatic, he said, loud enough for everyone. I paused, looked at him, then closed my bag anyway. 3 days later, Daniel opened an email that made him go completely silent. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Daniel kept staring at the screen like maybe the words would change if he read them twice. I wasn't there to see his face in that moment, not in person. But I knew exactly when he opened it, because I'd spent the last 3 days making sure that email would land when he was in the office, at his desk, with no way to control who saw him react. And I knew what the subject line said. Formal notice, internal audit and documentation review, immediate action required. Not because I hacked anything, not because I was doing something reckless, because every step I took after that meeting was clean, documented, and very, very deliberate. But 3 days earlier, walking out of that conference room, I didn't feel powerful, I felt numb. The office was quiet in that fake corporate way where nobody says anything, but you can feel everyone listening. My heels clicked across the floor as I carried my bag back to my desk. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked if I was okay. Ryan stayed in the conference room with Daniel, probably because he didn't know what else to do. Or maybe because he did. I reached my desk, unplugged my charger, folded it, slid it into my bag, and grabbed the framed photo I kept beside my monitor. My sister had given it to me when I got hired there 4 years earlier. First real leadership track job, she'd said. I almost laughed. Melissa from operations stood up halfway from her chair like she wanted to say something. Then she glanced toward the conference room and sat back down. That hurt more than Daniel's announcement. Not because she was cruel, because she looked scared. And that was the thing about Daniel Reeves. He never had to raise his voice to control a room. He'd mastered that polished, reasonable tone that made everything sound professional, even when he was humiliating you in front of 15 people. If he shut you out of a meeting, he called it streamlining. If he gave your work to someone else, he called it cross-functional exposure. If you pushed back, suddenly you were emotional or not aligned or, my personal favorite, struggling with visibility. Visibility. I heard that word so many times in the last 2 months, it started sounding like a threat. I didn't storm out of the office. I didn't slam anything. I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, got in my car, locked the doors, and just sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. That was when it hit. Not just that I lost the promotion, that he'd planned for me to sit there and take it. Daniel hadn't pulled me aside privately. He hadn't explained anything before the meeting. He waited until the whole team was watching, then smiled and told me I should be happy for the man I had trained. He wanted my reaction managed in public. He wanted me small, quiet, and agreeable. And Ryan let him. I closed my eyes and replayed the last few months, whether I wanted to or not. Ryan Cole had joined our department 7 months earlier. Daniel introduced him as someone with strong leadership potential. That was before Ryan knew how our reporting system worked, before he understood client escalations, before he could finish a weekly performance deck without asking me where half the numbers came from. Daniel had assigned me to get him up to speed. At first, that didn't bother me. I was already the senior analyst everyone came to when something broke or a deadline got tight. Training people wasn't unusual. What made Ryan different was how much of the job he couldn't do on his own and how quickly Daniel started positioning that as temporary brilliance instead of inexperience. I'd stay late to walk Ryan through forecasting models. I'd rewrite his summaries before executive review. Twice, I caught major errors in his client reports less than an hour before they were sent. One of those mistakes would have triggered a contract penalty if it had gone out. He always thanked me. Seriously, Elena, you saved me. That was his line, over and over. And every time, I told myself it was fine, because Daniel had said the same thing to me privately more than once. You're already operating at lead level. Keep this up, and the next move is obvious. I need someone steady in that seat, and that's you. Those weren't vague hints. Those were promises. Maybe not on paper, but close enough that I stopped questioning where all this was headed. Then little things started changing. Meeting invites I would normally lead suddenly went to Ryan. Daniel asked me to send Ryan my talking points so he can get exposure. A quarterly review deck I built from scratch got presented by Ryan while I sat at the far end of the table listening to Daniel compliment his clarity. Afterward, I pulled Daniel aside and kept my voice calm. I made that deck. He didn't even deny it. He just smiled like I was missing something simple. Elena, leadership isn't only about doing the work. It's about being seen doing the work. At the time, I thought he was warning me. Now I know he was telling me exactly what he was doing. My phone buzzed in the parking garage. It was Melissa. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Hey, I said. She lowered her voice immediately. Did you leave? I'm in my car. A pause. Then, I'm sorry. I looked out through the windshield at the concrete pillar in front of me. For what part? Another pause. Longer this time. For all of it, she said, and for the fact that nobody said anything in there. That landed hard, because it confirmed what I already knew. People had seen it happening. Maybe not all of it, maybe not clearly, but enough. I leaned back in my seat. Did you know? No, she said quickly. Not today. Not exactly. But she stopped herself. But what? I just think you should go back through your files. Your shared folders, too. I sat up. Why? Again, she hesitated. I could hear office noise faintly behind her printers, chairs moving, somebody laughing too loudly somewhere down the hall like normal life was still happening. Because something's off, she said. And I don't think this was just favoritism. She hung up before I could ask anything else. That call changed the next 3 days. Not because it gave me answers. Because it told me I wasn't imagining the pattern. I went home, set my bag on the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop at the table without even taking off my shoes. I logged into the company's systems I still had access to and started pulling everything I could legally review my drafts. My sent emails, version histories, timestamps, archived chats, meeting notes, shared drive edits. At first, it was just a feeling turning into a list. Then the list started becoming something else. A renamed file here, a forwarded draft there. My language in Ryan's presentations, nearly word for word. A document I created showing a different editor trail than the one attached to the final version. Nothing explosive on its own. But together it looked a lot less like bad judgment and a lot more like design. By midnight, my dining table was covered in handwritten notes, names, dates, file titles, meeting times, moments I'd ignored because I was too busy working to stop and ask why my work kept becoming someone else's talking point. I barely slept. The next morning, Daniel sent me a message like the day before hadn't happened. Let's connect later this week about your path forward. My path forward. I read that twice, then set my phone down and opened another folder. And that was where I found the first thing I knew Daniel would never be able to explain away. Not a rumor, not an impression, a record. A clean, dated, system-generated record. I stared at the screen, and for the first time since that meeting, I stopped feeling humiliated. Because I finally understood one thing. Daniel thought he had controlled the room. He had no idea he'd just given me a timeline. And once I saw what had been changed, and when, I knew exactly where to look next. The first time I noticed it clearly, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Ryan was sitting across from me, frowning at his screen. Hey, can you take a look at this? He asked, turning his laptop toward me. It was the weekly performance report, again. I leaned over, scanned it, and immediately spotted 3 inconsistencies in the data pulls. These numbers don't match the source file, I said, already reaching for my mouse. Did you refresh the dataset before exporting? He blinked. I thought I did. I fixed it in under 5 minutes. That was normal back then. What wasn't normal was what happened the next day. We were in the Monday leadership sync, one of the meetings I used to run. Daniel sat at the head of the table, hands folded, while Ryan walked everyone through the exact report I had corrected the night before. Same structure, same phrasing, even the way the insights were framed, it was mine. Daniel nodded along as Ryan spoke. Good clarity here, he said. This is what leadership looks like. I didn't say anything. Not in that room. but I felt it. A small shift. Subtle, easy to dismiss, until it wasn't. After the meeting, I caught up to Daniel near his office. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. "That report Ryan presented my version." Daniel didn't even break stride. "You supported him," he replied. "That's part of growing into leadership." "I built it," I said. He stopped then, turned slightly toward me, and gave me that same calm smile. "Elena, if you want to move up, you need to think beyond ownership. You need to think visibility." There was that word again. At the time, I let it go. Because a week later, he pulled me into a one-on-one and said something completely different. "I see what you're doing," he told me, leaning back in his chair. "You're already operating at the next level. Keep this up and we'll make it official soon." That should have reassured me. Instead, it made everything more confusing. Because right after that, I stopped getting invited to meetings I used to lead. Calendar notifications just stopped. I'd find out afterward that Ryan had presented updates on projects I was still actively managing. When I asked him about it, he looked uncomfortable. "Daniel said you were swamped," he told me once. "He didn't want to overload you." I stared at him. I wasn't swamped. I didn't even know the meeting was happening. Ryan didn't have an answer for that. He just nodded slowly, like he understood something I didn't. That was when I started paying closer attention. Not reacting, not confronting, just watching. I noticed how Daniel would ask me for updates privately, then have Ryan deliver them publicly. How he'd request my drafts, then forward them in threads where I wasn't included. How he started using phrases like, "Ryan's been driving this," even when I had the full audit trail showing otherwise. Still, I told myself there had to be a reason. There always is, right? Maybe Daniel was testing Ryan. Maybe he was seeing how I handled delegation. Maybe this was some twisted version of leadership development. That's what I told myself until the day Melissa stopped me by the printer. She didn't usually get involved in anything outside operations. She kept her head down, did her work, and left on time. So when she lowered her voice and said, "Can I ask you something?" I knew it wasn't casual. "Sure," I said. She glanced around before continuing. "That client escalation deck from last week, the one Ryan presented?" "Yeah?" "I saw an earlier version in the shared drive," she said carefully. "It had your name on it." I felt my chest tighten slightly. "That makes sense. I made the first draft." She shook her head. "No, I mean the final version. Same content, same formatting, but the author history was different." I didn't respond right away. "Different how?" I asked. She hesitated. "It showed Ryan as the creator." That didn't make sense. Version histories don't just rewrite themselves. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I didn't think anything of it at first," she said, "but then I saw it happen again yesterday, another file, same pattern." I stared at the printer as it hummed beside us, pages sliding out one by one like nothing in the world had shifted. "Melissa," I said slowly, "those systems track everything. You can't just change authorship like that." "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I'm telling you." She picked up her papers, paused, then added, "Just check your stuff." And then she walked away. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Because up until that moment, I could still explain everything away as bias, favoritism, bad management. But this wasn't a feeling anymore. This was starting to look like something intentional. And as I walked back to my desk, one question kept repeating in my head. If my work was being changed, then how many times had it already happened without me noticing? By the next morning, it wasn't subtle anymore. Ryan had my job. Not officially, his title had changed. Mine hadn't, but everything else had. People who used to come to me for approvals were now looping him in instead. Meetings I used to run showed up on the calendar with his name at the top. Even Slack threads shifted tone overnight. "Hey Ryan, can you confirm?" "Ryan, what's the direction here?" I was still in the channels, just not part of the decisions. I sat at my desk, watching it happen in real time, like someone had flipped a switch and rewritten how the entire team operated. Around 10 a.m., I sent Daniel a message. "We need to talk." He responded 10 minutes later. 2:30. My office. No apology, no explanation, just a time slot. When I walked in that afternoon, he didn't even gesture for me to sit. He was already mid-email, typing like this was any other meeting. "I'll be direct," I said, closing the door behind me. "You told me I was next for that role." He kept typing for another few seconds, then hit send and finally looked up. "I told you that you were on the right track," he said. Calm, measured, controlled. That's not what you said, I replied. He leaned back slightly. Elena, perception matters here. Ryan demonstrated leadership when it counted. A pause. I let that sit for exactly 1 second before answering. Ryan presented work I did. Daniel didn't react. You supported him, he said. That's part of team success. That's not what's happening, I said, sharper now. You've been giving him my work, excluding me from meetings, and then crediting him for it. That finally got a shift. Not anger, not defensiveness. Annoyance. Be careful, Daniel said quietly. You're starting to sound emotional. There it was. I felt it hit, but I didn't take the bait. I'm being specific, I said. You can check the files, the timestamps, the... Elena, he cut me off, voice firmer now. You weren't visible enough. That's the reality. Ryan was. I stared at him. Visible? After everything I had done, everything I had built, everything I had handed off because he told me to, this was the narrative he chose. And in that moment, something shifted. Not anger. Clarity. Because he wasn't denying it. He was redefining it. I nodded once, slowly. Got it. Daniel seemed satisfied with that. Good. Then let's focus on your development plan going forward. I'll think about it, I said. And then I walked out. No argument, no escalation, no scene. That part came later. Back at my desk, I opened the files Melissa had mentioned. Not just one or two. All of them. Shared folders, archived projects, anything Ryan had touched that I had worked on first. And once I started looking with the right question in mind, I couldn't unsee it. Version histories that didn't line up, documents created under my login, then duplicated, renamed, and reassigned. My language copied almost word for word, appearing in files that listed Ryan as the original author. Timestamps that told a very different story than the one Daniel was presenting. This wasn't sloppy management. It was systematic. And then I found the one thing that removed any doubt. A document I had created late one night, timestamped, saved, and closed. The next version, opened under Ryan's account, renamed, re-uploaded, and then shared in a leadership thread without me included. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, because this wasn't just credit being shifted after the fact. This was work being reassigned before it was ever seen. That's when Melissa messaged me. Did you check? I replied with one word. Yes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, came back again. Then, it's worse than I thought, isn't it? I didn't answer that. Instead, I opened a new document and started organizing everything. Dates, files, originals, edited versions, access logs. If I was wrong, this would fall apart quickly. But it didn't. It got stronger, cleaner. Clear enough that by the time I finished, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was documenting. At 6:42 p.m., I attached the first set of files to an internal HR report. Then I paused, because this was the point where most people stop. File the complaint. Wait, hope someone takes it seriously. But I already knew how that usually went. Slow, quiet, contained. Daniel had been doing this too cleanly for too long to rely on a quiet process. So I opened the company compliance policy, scrolled, found the clause, external audit escalation permitted when internal integrity is in question. My cursor hovered for a second, then I clicked, attached everything again, added one line at the bottom. If this is not reviewed independently, I will escalate this beyond the company. I hit send and leaned back. For the first time since that meeting, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was setting something in motion. 3 days later, Daniel opened that email. And this time, he wasn't controlling the room anymore. Daniel tried to get ahead of it. That was the first thing I heard. The morning after I submitted everything, Melissa leaned over the divider between our desks, her voice low. HR just blocked Daniel's calendar for most of the week. I didn't look up right away. For what? She gave me a look. You already know. By noon, it wasn't just Daniel. Calendar invites started going out across the team, mandatory one-on-ones with HR. No agenda listed. Just a time, a room number, and a note. Attendance required. People noticed. You could feel it in the way conversations stopped when someone walked by. in the way Slack went quieter than usual, in the way Ryan kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something he couldn't control. At 1:15, Melissa got called in. She stood up slowly, smoothed out her shirt, and looked at me for half a second before heading down the hall. No words, just that same look from the meeting, the one that said, "This isn't normal." I kept working. Or at least, I kept my screen open and my posture steady. Inside, everything was running fast, because this was the part where things either got buried or surfaced. Melissa came back 20 minutes later. She didn't sit right away, just stood behind her chair gripping the back of it. "Well?" I asked quietly. She exhaled. "They asked about specific files, dates, who created what, who presented it." I nodded once. And I told them the truth," she said. Then, after a beat, they already had most of it. That mattered. More than anything else so far, that mattered. Because it meant this wasn't being filtered through Daniel first. This was already moving past him. At 2:40, Ryan's calendar alert went off. I heard it from across the room. He hesitated before standing up, like if he moved too quickly, it would confirm something. Then he grabbed his notebook and walked toward the same hallway Melissa had taken. He didn't look at me. Not once. When he came back, it was different. Subtle but obvious if you knew what to look for. His shoulders were tighter. His usual half smile was gone. He sat down, opened his laptop, and stared at the screen without typing. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then he stood up again and walked straight to Daniel's office. The door closed behind them. Voices stayed low, but tension doesn't need volume to carry. You could feel it ripple across the floor. People pretended to work, but no one was actually focused. I watched the reflection in the glass panel of Daniel's office instead of turning around directly. Ryan was talking first. Fast. Hands moving. Daniel stayed still. Then Daniel said something. Ryan stopped. Just stopped. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Ryan walked out. This time, he did look at me. Only for a second, but it was enough. There was no confidence left in his expression. No quiet agreement, no "this is working out" energy. Just uncertainty. And something else. Regret, maybe. At 4:10, I got my own calendar invite. HR interview, 4:30 p.m., conference room B. No sender name, just the department. I closed my laptop slowly, stood up, and walked down the same hallway. The room was smaller than I expected. 2 people were already inside. One from HR, one I didn't recognize. That was new. "Elena Carter?" the HR rep said. "Yes." "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." I sat across from them, hands resting lightly on the table. The second person introduced himself. "I'm part of the compliance review team." So it wasn't internal anymore. Not really. They didn't start with small talk. They started with specific. File names, timestamps, project titles, exact phrasing from documents I had written. They already knew. What they needed from me wasn't information. It was confirmation. "Can you verify that you authored this version?" the compliance officer asked, sliding a printed document across the table. I glanced at it once. "Yes." "And that you did not receive credit for its presentation?" "Yes." "Were you aware that this version was reassigned under another employee's account before distribution?" I met his eyes. "Not at the time." He nodded slightly, made a note, then exchanged a brief look with the HR rep. That look told me more than any question. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern they could already see. After 20 minutes, they closed their folders. "Thank you, Elena," the HR rep said. "This has been very helpful." I stood up, but before I reached the door, the compliance officer spoke again. "One more thing." I turned back. "We've verified authorship records across multiple systems," he said. "This goes beyond a single incident." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because I already knew what he was about to say next would change everything for Daniel. He glanced down at his notes, then back at me. "This is no longer a standard internal review." A pause. "It's a formal disciplinary investigation." And somewhere just a few offices away, Daniel hadn't heard that part yet. Daniel heard it the next morning. Not from me. Not from Ryan. Not even from HR in a casual tone. From a formal notice. The kind that gets sent with legal language documented timestamps, and zero room for interpretation. By then, the investigation had already expanded. What started as a complaint about a single promotion decision turned into a full audit trail across multiple projects, multiple months, multiple systems. And the more they pulled, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't isolated. It was consistent, deliberate, and documented in ways Daniel couldn't talk his way out of. The company's systems tracked everything: file creation, edits, transfers, account activity. Every time a document was duplicated, renamed, or reassigned, it left a record. Every time I sent a draft, every time it was forwarded, every time it showed up under someone else's name, there was a timestamp. And those timestamps told a story Daniel had been rewriting out loud. One where Ryan was leading, one where I was supporting. But the data didn't match the narrative. It showed my files being created first, my edits being final, my work being moved sometimes minutes later into versions that listed Ryan as the origin. Not accidentally, not occasionally, repeatedly. Across weeks, across critical deliverables, across the exact projects Daniel had used to justify the promotion. When HR and compliance finished compiling everything, they didn't ask Daniel what happened. They showed him side-by-side comparisons, original files and reassigned versions, communication logs where he requested my work, then forwarded it without me included, calendar exclusions that aligned perfectly with when those files were presented. It wasn't just favoritism. It was constructed. As for Ryan, that part came out slower. At first, he claimed he didn't realize what was happening, said he assumed Daniel was just looping him in more because of the promotion track, that he didn't question why he was presenting work he hadn't fully built. And for a while, that held until they showed him the version histories. The moments where he accessed my files directly, the edits made under his login, the uploads that replaced originals. Not all of it was Daniel. Some of it required Ryan to participate, even if it started small. Even if he told himself it wasn't a big deal. At some point he knew, and he didn't stop. That was enough. By the end of the week, the decisions came down. Daniel was terminated. No announcement, no meeting, just a quiet removal. His calendar disappeared first, then his name was gone from internal directories. By Monday, his office was empty, desk cleared, nameplate removed like he had never been there. But people noticed. They always do. Word spread the way it always does in offices, quietly, through half sentences and careful phrasing. Policy violation. Misconduct. Investigation. No one said everything out loud. They didn't have to. Ryan wasn't fired. But he didn't keep the role either. The promotion was reversed. His title rolled back, responsibilities reassigned. He stayed on the team, but the dynamic around him changed overnight. Conversations got shorter. Trust got thinner. People stopped going to him for answers. And the worst part wasn't what anyone said. It was what they didn't. He tried to talk to me once. Caught me near the elevators at the end of the day. "Elena, can we just talk for a second?" I stopped, but I didn't step closer. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly rehearsing something he couldn't quite land. "I didn't know how to fix it," he said finally. "Once it started, I thought." I cut him off, not loudly, but firmly. "You knew enough." He flinched slightly. That was the end of that conversation. I didn't need anything else from him. A few days later, HR asked me to come in again. This time, the tone was different. More formal, more careful. "Elena," the rep said, folding her hands on the table, "based on the findings, we'd like to offer you the team lead position, effective immediately." There it was. The thing I had been working toward. The thing I had already been doing. The thing that started all of this. She continued, "There would also be a compensation adjustment to reflect the delay, along with a formal acknowledgement of your contributions to the audited projects." It was clean. Structured. Correct on paper. I looked at her for a second, then nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. But appreciation and acceptance aren't the same thing. "I'm going to decline." She blinked, just slightly. "Can I ask why?" I considered that because the real answer wasn't dramatic. It was simple. Because I already know how this environment works, I said, and I don't want to build something inside it. There was no argument after that. No pressure. Just a quiet understanding that some things don't reset just because the right decision finally gets made. I gave my notice the following week. No long speech, no exit interview full of complaints. Just a transition plan, clean documentation, and a final walkthrough of everything I had built. On my last day, I packed my desk the same way I had started to in that meeting. Carefully, quietly, without needing anyone to watch. Melissa walked over before I left. "I'm glad you did it," she said. "Me too," I replied. Not because it was easy, because it was clear. 2 weeks later, I walked into a different office. New company, smaller team, different structure. No one there needed convincing about what I could do. No one needed visibility explained to them. They had already seen the work. As I sat down at my new desk, opened my laptop, and logged into a system where my name actually matched what I built, the contrast was almost quiet. No tension. No correction. No one rewriting anything behind the scenes. Just work. Real work. And this time, no one else's name on it. Across the city, Daniel's office stayed empty for a while before someone else moved in. No announcement tied back to him. No reference to what happened. Just a space that used to belong to someone who thought control was enough to rewrite reality. It wasn't. Because visibility, it turns out, isn't about who stands in front of the room. It's about what's left behind when someone finally decides to look. And this time, there was nothing he could erase.
What would you have done? Reported him, stay silent, or expose everything like she did?